What's up, everybody? Welcome to CFP Talks. My name is Jonas, and with me, as always, is my main man, Mr. David Fuchs.
Yo, Nissim, how
David,
are you?
it is almost CFP time. It We are getting close. I can sniff it. I could smell it. I could feel it. I'm excited. Like this is one of the most like it's kind of a crazy time, but it's also a very exciting time and a nerve-wracking time. And there's like a lot of emotions that come with this last month of CFP prep. And it's always exciting to be with students at this point. And this is one of my more favorite parts of telling students like, hey, now it's time to shut it down.
Yeah,
And I think this is a really important part that has absolutely nothing to do with study.
yeah, and it's funny because I remember the first time you told me, or the first and only time, I guess,
Yeah.
thankfully, when you told me, this is when I think, this is when you should be shutting it down. And I remember my first thought was, I was like, what do you mean? Like, what's he talking about? Shutting it down? Like, don't we just go right up until the day before, or a couple days before? And you kind of press that into, impress that into us and into me that no, you need to shut it down at some point because at some point it's somewhat counterproductive to keep
Mm.
doing stuff up until the day before or up until a couple days before. And I found that after obviously knowing that I ended up passing to be extremely valuable advice. And I also found it extremely valuable because you're not hearing that most other places. So I found that extremely valuable, and I think it's extremely important to know like when to shut it down. Now, I think it's different for everybody. I don't think there's like an exact time when to do it. I think there's a general ballpark area of when to do it, but some people may have to go a little bit further. Some people may be able to stop a little bit earlier, but in general, there is a time for everybody when you should be shutting it down and focusing on not as much the studying, but more about getting mentally there. That's the
Yeah.
whole point with the shut it down.
Yeah. And I think there's kind of phases to this process, right? And I think, if you look at the first phase of shutting it down, it's 5, 6 weeks out. There should be nothing on your calendar other than CFP. Again, ideally, that's even earlier, right? 2.5, 3 months out, there should be really no social commitments. You should really be shutting this down in terms of like, I need to go and do this, and if you absolutely have to do it, then do it. And then there's like starting to shut it down from a study perspective. And one of the reasons that I even implemented this process was somewhat from a personal perspective, but somewhat from an emotional IQ standpoint, where you know conventional knowledge would say if an exam is coming up, you study up until the last minute because you're trying to get every little last detail you possibly can, because you might see that one question on the exam, and if you studied the day before and saw it, then you're going to get it right on the test, and that could be the question that pushes you overboard.
Listen, I will be lying if said that that's not something that I have thought about.
Of
When
course.
it came to that, that's very natural to think about. So I just for people out there, like I want them to know that that's normal to think about that. To be like, well, what if I learn one thing that gets me a question right in the exam that puts me over? Good point. I get that. I understand that.
It's and it's an understandable point, but also, you know, it is the last minute foul that everybody points the finger out in a game, not the other 48 min or 47 minutes of play.
True. And I
Right.
and I and that's a very good rebuttal to that. And that I wouldn't have thought of that on my own, but I'm happy you said that because that's a great point.
Right? Like, everybody wants to pinpoint it to one play, and if that play goes in your favor, whew, we got the win. But if the play doesn't go in your favor, but what about the other minutes, right? What about all the
Yeah.
other penalties or the other fouls or the other? mishaps or the other mental breakdowns that happen. And, this is why a study plan matters is that if you're trying to pinpoint it to the last week, then your study plan, your execution didn't really work. So, the emphasis has to be is that all your decisions matter in this process. And if you want to point at it to the last 3 days, then you've probably put too much pressure on those last 3 days to perform. What about all the other weekends and weekdays and study days and days that you skipped and days that you said, I don't feel like doing flashcards today, or days that you were supposed to do 50 questions and you did 35? Every one of those decisions plays a role in that. And so when we're starting to shut it down, it's because we've done everything that we've needed to do. And it's more valuable to rest at the end and not work your way into kind of into anxiety and into like a tizzy, because like, oh my God, I got to study, 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 study. I walk into the exam. I'm so burned out. I'm so anxious because it's a scary test. It's hard. And it's very easy to sit there and go, I'm going to let my kind of fear and anxiety take over, and the way to alleviate that is to study until the last minute. Even though that's not the thing that's going to work best, it makes me feel better.
It does. And in the moment, it does.
Yeah.
It's almost like a release. It's almost like I have to do this just to feel better, like temporarily, even though if in the long term, it may not be for your best, in your best interest.
Right. And I want you to think about this like arguing with your spouse or your girlfriend or your boyfriend or your significant other. It may feel really good to say something in the moment, but a week later, it probably wasn't the right thing to say.
Right.
And
Exactly.
and your relationship takes a hit because of, but again, it feels good in the moment to do it. I want you to think about the third quarter when you're in the first. I want you to think about the fourth quarter when you're in your first. And if that's something you're not capable of doing, go get some help. Ask somebody who can help you see all 4 quarters of this. Because when I say this to students, we're in the first quarter. If you're trying to do 6 hours a day right now, it's too much, because that means
Totally.
by halftime you're going to be out of this. I want you to knock this
Out.
down to three
Hmm.
hours and be consistent with it. Right. And on the flip side of that, well, if I'm doing 30 minutes or an hour a day, it's not enough. I need you to bring this effort up, because you're going to dig yourself in such a huge hole that you're not going to be able to catch up on the back end. Right. And remember, CFP is not the Series 7 or the SIE or any FINRA exam where you can just push out your exam day. This has a window in which you can take it. So we're always working against a clock that's ticking downwards.
Yep. Hmm.
So, I urge you that, when we're telling you guys to shut it down, it's because closer to the exam, instead of ramping up, we want to be ramping down. We want to be
Yep.
the people that have done all the work on the front end, that 6 days out, 7 days out, we're not taking the week off from work to study 40 hours. We're the people that are studying 90 minutes a day and resting and doing all the right things there. So we're not walking into the exam. And you see it, right? People walking in the exam, their hair is disheveled. They look like a mess. They haven't eaten in 3 days. There's crust all over their eyes. They look like they're hungover because they've just been studying and sleeping 2 hours a day. That's not optimal to take an exam. You know that. You know better than
Yeah.
that. And again, if especially if you're a parent, what would you tell your kid? Would you tell them to not do much on the front end and then ramp it up, or we want to plan accordingly and do it on the front end and then start shutting it down?
Yeah. Yep. No, no doubt. And again, there's kind of two, I guess, like if you guys have kind of picked up on it, there's kind of two aspects or components to this. It's when should you shut it down in terms of like basically canceling off all plans and making sure that your schedule is clear so you are totally free and flexible. And then the other one is that I was kind of referring to earlier was when should you shut it down, meaning like stop studying
Mm,
and really just kind of turning your attention to getting yourself healthy and re and fueled for this exam. They're obviously two different components, but they are relatively similar. and they
Mm,
kind of serve the same purpose.
yes.
But just know at some point, in the last, I think when should you shut it down in terms of like studying? Probably like about a week out, maybe like 5 days out. You could do like light work in that last week, but nothing too intense. And then in terms of plans, I kind of like Joe's, like once you hit that month mark, and we talked about this 2 episodes ago with the um, that we're talking about the last month. We talked about, in the last month when you should kind of shut it down just to clear your schedule so you are getting yourself in the right state of mind and fueled up for the exam. So there's two components. They're both equally as important in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think, shutting it down from that perspective, and and again, that doesn't mean that you can't do anything. It just means that things are going to be more touch and go, right?
Mm.
Like I want to, like, you went to a concert 2 weeks out from your exam, but
Yeah.
you had done all the studying necessary and it was your
Right.
way of unwinding. And again, I have no problem with that as long as you're being responsible. You're still home at 10:30, went to sleep and got up and studied the next.
Yeah, yeah, and exactly. And if I didn't feel comfortable doing that, like, hey, listen, I really shouldn't be doing this. I'm not in the place that I want to be right now, then I wouldn't have done it. But I felt comfortable at that point. So it's all kind of about like what's your personal, situation and how you're actually feeling. And I would also say that sometimes that could be productive too. And as long
Yes.
as you're not going to the concert and getting, hammered and you're out till 1 o'clock in the morning and you're screwing up your whole schedule, and you're as long as you're just going to a game, going to a concert, making plans, and you're being responsible and you're not, getting reckless, then sometimes that actually can be productive because, like we said over the last couple episodes, it is productive to take a break and decompress and take your mind off that for a little bit. So
Yep.
it actually can be productive for you as long as you're doing it in a responsible, non-reckless manner.
That's true. And when I was studying for level 2 of CFA, I remember I had a buddy's birthday party and I really didn't want to miss it. And it was on a Thursday night. And it wasn't really even a party. We just went out and had dinner and had some drinks. And I remember just feeling very bad about going on a Thursday night, especially going out. And I remember thinking to myself afterwards, I was like, I'm so happy that I did that because I felt so refreshed studying going into the weekend that it was worth the 3 hours off. And that was a really and it was a crucial point of my studying as well because it's ramped up. You're studying every day, you're going at it for 3 hours, and I desperately really needed the break. But
Yeah.
going out and having laughs with friends and chatting and having a drink or two, and again, we went out at 7 o'clock. I was in bed by 10:30. But just being out and being social, especially for me with my personality, like that recharges me. And for everybody,
Hmm.
it's a little bit different as to what recharges you. That recharged me. Great weekend of studying afterwards. But I just remember being like, that was such a good, like, release for my brain. That made me feel good. Get back to work.
Yep.
A little break, I got back to work. But it was little things like that that made it easy to continue to do what we needed to do.
Yep.
So, with that being said, we hope that you enjoyed this episode, everybody. With any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to reach out to David or myself. Please make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel, and we will see you on the next episode. Take care.